revolutionize the way that we manage, control, and access information. In business, key value is level of assurance. There's truly a win-win-win scenario. The right to choose who you want to share the information with, for how long can those people have access to your data, and what can they further do with that data set that you allow them to do. So we're building something pretty freaking awesome here. A little bit about today's conversation, so everybody kind of gets a chance to understand what you're about to walk into and what we're going to be discussing. So as Tim mentioned, we met in 2017 when we were really discovering and uncovering the world of blockchain technology, what it meant, what it's going to do, where it was going to be applied. And through this journey over the last, I guess, gosh, now 8 years, seems like yesterday to be honest, but 8 years later, we find ourselves in a position of seeing this technology now as just part of a transaction in everyday life. Is no longer talked about as it's blockchain. It's just another technology that supports a value for a business. That kind of triggers back to where we saw the technology grow from its grassroots. And for those that don't realize, blockchain goes back as far as 2009 when it really got introduced to the world. But further than that, it goes back actually into the 70s, where some of the cryptographic algorithms were created, and even some of the mathematical foundations of this technology were actually put in place. It really was 2009 that was kind of a bit of a peak to the value of how many technologies came together to actually allow for blockchain to become a thing. So this technology is not new by definition. It's just the way that it's been packaged, presented, and able to be brought to the mass markets that is really new to many. So I've spent a lot of time from 2017 forward actually building, actually we were the first group to ever do with Haskell School of Business, the first ever blockchain and education course for executives, board of directors, vice presidents, and senior executives of organizations in partnership with Haskell School of Business to teach people what this technology is going to do and how it's going to ultimately change the world that they work in, live in, and how they're going to operate together. So big passion for me is this environment. Now, what I've set out to do over the last number of years was to create a new technology company that was going to truly revolutionize the way that we manage, control, and access information. And at its baseline and core, everything fundamentally started with the application of permissioned blockchain technology. How many of you know the difference between permissioned and public? Fantastic. So we might as well cross that chasm right now and put that to bed. So in the space of blockchain, there's two variations that you need to know about. So there's public blockchain, which is what you've all heard about as cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, right? Like that's a way in which you and I don't know each other. We're untrusted actors to each other, but we need to transact with each other because you have something that I want, and you have in return something that I have. And in order to do that, we need to allow a third-party unknown member that's neither friends with me or you to be able to go in and actually ensure that what you have is actually real. What I have to exchange for that is also real, and we pay those third-party random folks with a cryptocurrency, right? We pay them what's called a gas fee or a token fee for them looking at both of our accounts and ensuring that the transaction is going to happen, and one person can't fool the other. So when we do that and we pay it via cryptocurrency, that's on a public blockchain. And in the business world, there's what's called a permissioned blockchain. And the reason why many companies moved to the world of permissioned blockchain is because we don't have the ability, whether it's from a CFO's office or a CIO's office, to manage things like a node, to manage our own cryptocurrencies, to be able to put them on the books and know how much we have to pay for each transaction every year. Those are things that become very big unknowns. You might have heard in the past that, to complete a crypto transaction would be $5 today versus 25 cents versus $8. Well, the reality is you can't go to your CFO and say, hey, you know what I need for a budget this year? A variation between $1,000 and $1 million. No CFO is ever going to prove that, right? Because they don't understand how that's going to happen. So, in order to do that, that's where the public blockchain world started living. Well, the business world saw that there's a value proposition underlying this entire technology, which is how you cryptographically secure information and how you append the data on a ledger. And the reason why the ledger component is really important is because what blockchain brought to the market is this concept of a ledger-based technology that allows for data to be recorded, and the data itself can never be deleted. It can only be appended to. So when you look at blockchain as an append-only technology, this is why. It's because you can go in and you can say, Tim and I agree on the transaction, we record it. If something needs to change, we can append to it. But we always have a full record going back to the beginning of the transaction of who touched it, how the transaction was managed, and what was the next posting of that transaction. So you can imagine how powerful this becomes from a finance committee perspective, from a asset traceability perspective, so knowing that you can always trace back to the origin of that asset right from the get-go. So now if you take and extrapolate that basis of this technology, where blockchain really becomes a foundational aspect of this, imagine how much more powerful it is when you can take each one of those transactions and you can cryptographically secure it in such a way in which only you and your partners that you trust can open that transaction, and nobody else can. So the reason why permission blockchain became really a part of the business world, and out of the Fortune 500 organizations in the world, over 90% of them have started either developing, using, or have deployed a sort of a blockchain in a permissioned blockchain environment, where they've actually not just played around with the technology, but it's actually part of their day-to-day operations. You've seen everything from the largest car manufacturers like the BMWs and Mercedes, all the way through to the Shells and the larger operators in the world, where this technology is now part of their core business line, because they can create a way in which the ledger can record the information, they can be the ones that can decrypt the data, and they can make use of it for audit purposes or for levels of assurance. Any business, key value is level of assurance. And you know exactly what it is that you have, and it's something that you don't have any doubt around. The reason why I kind of give you a little bit of this preamble to understand the basis of this technology and what kind of got us here, and what got me passionate about what I'm doing here is there's a new evolution to the world of blockchain technology. Whether it's public or private blockchain, there's an evolution to it. And this evolution is verifiable credentials. Elena and I co-founded a different tech company in 2009. That tech company grew and ultimately got acquired in 2016. And that technology focused on creating a supply chain solution for the transportation of dangerous goods across Canada and the US. The technology got big enough, and we didn't have to have a big team to do this. So we were a team of 6 people, but with 6 people, we managed to have over 30% market share in Canada, and ultimately we ended up getting 100% market share in the US when the US EPA acquired our platform to deploy for every single transportation of dangerous goods in the US. It's running on our own technology and architecture. So to give you an idea, that runs about 6.5 million transactions a day are being processed through that technology. The reason why we built that technology is because we wanted to be able to create a new model of proof where a generator of waste, so think about an energy company, a transportation company, and a disposal facility could all work off of a single source of truth and understand that what waste is being shipped, what transporter is carrying that waste, and what the receiver is going to get can be ultimately accumulated and reported back to all the different regulatory bodies in such a way in which everybody can trust that the data is verified at source, and its levels of assurance are based on everybody agreeing through that entire chain of supply of that information that the information is correct. So as you can imagine, doing this on just a traditional system with a traditional database model was a perfect evolution for us when we can now take this data and create a different cryptographic method of ensuring the data is recorded and trusting that the partners are only the partners that we invite, and no malicious third parties can come in and embed themselves in the process as a third party that's not actually there. So for us, blockchain technology was a natural evolution of where we started, where we closed out our chapter of post-acquisition, and then we were going to go next. So after the acquisition, I said to Elena that I really wanted to build a company, a SaaS-based company that's going to be focused on blockchain technology as its core value, and that's what we ultimately wanted to bring to market. So when Tim got a chance to meet me also during 2018, I think in that year I did just over 100 public speaking engagements across Canada, US, and Europe around blockchain technology, evangelizing for the platform of what it's going to be and how people are going to ultimately use it. Now, one of the things that triggered us to create the company that we created, which is Credivera, and some of you might know us as TerraHub Technologies, which is still our incorporated name, but Credivera is our product facing and market facing name. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create a way in which there's truly a win-win-win scenario. And I know it's really hard to comprehend that because we always say we want everybody to win, but we always kind of look at what's the triangle of inflection, which is only two quarters really win, right? So it's always, what is that, price, delivery, and quality. So you always get 2 out of the 3, you never get really 3. So I really wanted to find a way to actually create a true win-win-win throughout this process. So what we saw was a massive change in the world of digital identity. And the change was coming from Europe. How many of you are familiar with GDPR? A few hands. Okay. So GDPR compliance is part of the laws that got created in Europe and got published in, I believe it was 2018, 2019, when GDPR got published in Europe. And the value of GDPR was basically to say to organizations, you don't have the right to own people's data without the people's consent. And the people have the right to choose how they're going to allow you to use that data. And also, if a person doesn't like working with you, they have the right to be forgotten. So that is a very big jump to the world of digital identity. And the reason why this is also very important is because there was some incredibly hefty fines that were published behind the breach of people's data and identity. So during this time frame, what people didn't realize is that GDPR was in the works for over 10 years, and it had over 900 revisions done to the document itself before publishing. And to what everybody felt like it was suddenly, it happens to me and now I have to comply with this. It's been in the works and everybody's been waving red flags out there saying, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And they've been waving flags for 10 years, but it's kind of like the boy that cried wolf, right? You keep saying it's coming and then you never do anything and then everybody's gonna be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Well, that was the same thing with blockchain technology, right? It started in 2009, people kept saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and then nobody paid attention to it, but now it's 15 years or 14 years in the making, and it's in production, and it's usable, and it's transactable, and it's something that's now already there, right? So with the world of identity, this massive shift of digital identity and people's data ownership is something that's critical. Because as that happened in Europe, immediately in the United States, the first state that picked up the new digital identity laws was California. Why is California an important state? Because it's Silicon Valley. Every major tech company is in California, right? Headquartered, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, you name them. Any one of the major groups that owns people's identities, right? Talk about Twitter, talk about all the social media organizations, they're all based in Silicon Valley. So if California now passes the exact same rules of GDPR, where people now have the rights to be forgotten, what a critical change to the world of identity. And then behind the scenes, you now have Canada that's been working over the last 3 years to put together its own new digital identity laws, which are going to be passed in Canada here shortly. And you can follow them. It's called Bill C-27, so Charter Rights of Data Privacy for Canadian people and Canadian businesses. So C-27 is the overlaying law for Canadians' data privacy. Bill C-11 is the Radio Act for Data Privacy, so this is your CBCs and other media streamed privacy rights. And then the last one in Quebec is called Bill C-25. Bill C-25 in Quebec is a replica of Bill C-27, but Quebec tends to have its own personalized laws that are applicable to the Quebec ecosystem, but recognize that they're both coming in together. So Bill C-27 is something that you really need to understand, especially if you're working in data, if you're working with people's data, or what you think is unstructured data or data that's been, scrubbed, you have to be careful with it, because this is part of the new laws that you're going to have to deal with when you de-identify this information. And how you do it, how it can be reconstructed, this is part of your new challenge. So Bill C-27 is something that's now being tabled, is being discussed at length in the House Commons. But more importantly, what's going to make Bill C-27 very, very powerful in Canada is that it actually will have its own separate tribunal. So why this is important to understand is because this is not going to go through your traditional tribunal process where today, if I'm Sobeys and I have a breach and I have to report my breach, it goes to the general tribunal. Now it's going to go to a completely separate tribunal, which none of us yet know who are the 9 tribunal members that are going to be selected for the seating, that are then going to actually provide the definition of the fine that you're going to be receiving. And the fine in Europe can be up to 3% EBITDA, or up to $10 million, depending on the size of the organization, or 10 million euros equivalent. In Canada, it's going to be up to 5% global EBITDA. So what does it actually mean? For those of you that are not super nerdy on numbers like I am, or maybe Tim is, 5% global EBITDA is earth-shattering to an organization. It is a make or break year in a lot of cases, right? To give you an idea, if you're in the agribusiness, 5% EBITDA can actually completely wipe out any profits that you earned that entire year. You can actually go into negative for that year. So I can be the dairy farmers moving all the milk in Canada, and that 5% EBITDA can actually completely breach and destroy all the revenues and profits that I've made this year. So it's very, very important to understand this. And when I say the word global EBITDA, it's on your global operations. So I can be a small operating entity here in Canada, and I have 600 employees in, let's say, Morocco, or Latin America. And if I have the breach here, and I report it, they're going to look at my global EBITDA as an organization. So, very, very powerful, very interesting, and you should really kind of dig into it and get to know it a little bit more, because it is going to impact you or impact your potential clients, depends who you work with. Now, I've said all these things, but I've said them for a reason, because this is the preamble as to where the world of verifiable credentials is starting to come in. So before we move further into putting the value of verifiable credentials to work, let's talk a little bit about what are verifiable credentials. How many of you are familiar with W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium? Okay, well, write that down and start reading it, because you will all need it. However, you all know about it, you just don't know what they're called. The reason why you know the W3C consortium is because this is the World Wide Web Consortium. This is the one that's created the World Wide Web standards. So the reason why you have HTTP and HTTPS on the front of your website name is because the World Wide Web Consortium is the one that created the standard of how a website will be created and will be named and how it will ultimately be published. Because maybe some of you are a little bit younger, some of you are in our age group, but when we used to sell even 10 years ago into companies, I would walk into an organization and they would say, can your system run on, I don't know, Internet Explorer 11? And then another one would be like, well, we only run Mozilla. And another one would say, I only run this kind of a browser. And now your system would have to find a way to be compatible with each one of these browsers. But none of these browsers were really compatible with each other. So now you're continuously running all these different code bases to support every one of these different streams. And it became a complete nightmare. So you would walk into a company, and part of your sales process, you would literally ask, what's the web browser you use, and what's the latest version? And if they say, well, our IT team won't upgrade past this, then you say, maybe we just don't do business together. And then you walk away. So it was a faster no than you waiting for a no from the client telling you they can't buy your software. But the reason why I'm saying this is very important is because the World Wide Web Consortium is the one that actually created the standards, where now when you publish to one website, it all looks the same across any single website provider. So it doesn't matter that you use Brave, it doesn't matter that you use Mozilla, it doesn't matter that you use Google or Safari, it doesn't really matter. They all always upload and display the same. Why this is very, very critical is because since the inception of W3C. And since the last major update of W3C, which was the HTTPS standard, this is the first standard that they've brought to light and approved across the world, which is the new Verifiable Credentials standard. And Verifiable Credentials is the new standard that's going to manage and allow you to exchange information over the internet for identity of a person, identity of a business, and identity of an asset, which technically kind of encompasses everything in the world. So, Verifiable Credentials is a new method of cryptographically securing a data set and attributing that data set to a person, a business, or an asset. And why you want to understand how this is going to work is because everything that you do, whether you're transacting an online email transfer, whether you're sharing your information to log into a system, whether you're exchanging data about a physical asset like I am doing a rig move from here to here, all of this information, you want it to be cryptographically secured in such a way in which only the recipient of your key can actually be the one that sees that data. But more importantly, it's because you want to be able to have the right to choose who you want to share the information with, for how long can those people have access to your data, and what can they further do with that data set that you allow them to do. So as an example, when I walk into a bank today, the bank says, what do you need to do? And I'm saying I want to get a new mortgage. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to need all this information from you, and then we're going to run an Equifax check from you. Well, we've all been in the situation, you walk in and somebody literally writes some stuff down on the paper and you're like, where is this going? And they're like, shredder, secure shredding, and you're like, yeah, I don't know about that. Kind of looks like you're just holding on to this piece of paper right now. And then they'll type it into a system, and then the system will just transfer this information and receive a response back. But where's the consent of you as a user to be able to say, hey, I'm going to give you this data, only this selectively disclosed data, for this period of time to do this action. So, you need my driver's license. Well, what do you need for my driver's license to know that it's me? You need to know my age. You need to know that it's a valid driver's license and that it was issued by a registry that you trust, right? So it's a provincial registry that you trust. But you don't need to know off my driver's license my height, my weight, my eye color, my hair color. You need to know whether I wear glasses, not glasses. That's metadata that belongs to me. So the selective disclosure of data really comes when you talk about the things that I need to be able to present to you for you to be able to complete your transaction, and nothing else more than that really is needed in this conversation. So now when I'm going to be walking into the bank using verifiable credentials, I will now be able to say, what do you need from me? And you'll say, I need the driver's license. Okay, well here's the metadata of the driver's license you need. Where do you want to use it? I want to use it for an Equifax check. Okay, well how long will that take you? 6 minutes? Okay, well here's the data set that you need for the next, let's say, 15 minutes. And at the end of that transaction, the token expires and the data is now encrypted and it is no longer something that anybody can access. However, we talked about the ledger component. So the value of a verifiable credential is that the information is ledgered. So you can always go back and see where the information was shared, to who was shared, and for how long it was shared. And it's your choice for how long you want to maintain that data there for until you want to retrieve it back. Now, if the people at Equifax wanted to do something else with that data, then guess what? That token is expired. But most importantly, if I opened up the token, let's say for a year, because I wanted to give something to somebody for a year-long period of that token, if they were to take that information and share it somewhere else, then you would be able to see who the third party is that, or the fifth or sixth or seventh party is that's trying to access this data, and you could choose to say revoke, or you can choose to say access. But the data is moving into your control, where you get to own it, manage it, and maintain its purity. Because what's it like today? If you go onto Facebook, right, or any social media, you share your data for free. They take that data, they sell it, and they tell you pretty clearly in the terms and conditions, we own your data, right? They take that data and they sell it. They turn a profit on it, but you don't see a penny out of the data that they sold, right? Anybody get paid from Facebook? 'Cause I don't get paid from Facebook, right, when I share my data. But you are the customer, you are the data, and that's what they want from you. So the whole point of verifiable credentials and the whole point of owning your own information and owning what you know about yourself and what you know about everything that you have at your purview is something that's worth something to something. So in the future, it's no longer about giving it, it's about giving it with a entity of receiving something back. So in certain cases, the receiving something back is, I got my credit score back right away, and everybody knows who I am, and the right people can now go ahead and proceed for providing me my mortgage, so I got something in return for it. It doesn't always have to be monetary back, but it can be something of value to me. So I shared something of value with them, they shared something of value back with me. So, all of this to say that when we said we wanted to create a win-win-win situation for the organization, we wanted to do it in such a way in which an organization that we sell to. So, the purpose of Credivera is to create the largest credential exchange of verifiable data where an individual can own their own information. So today, for example, the wallet that you've had shared with you from Untapped Energy, that wallet is your wallet. You get to own that wallet. That wallet that you just signed up for today is something that allows you to now be able to manage and add information into it for the purpose of recording and seeing things that really you've achieved, right? So it's your achievements. Today, being here listening to me, I know it doesn't sound like a good thing, but it's an achievement. You achieved something today. You came here and you spend time outside of your traditional day-to-day operations to learn something new. So it's your achievement. The one thing that nobody can take away from you is what you've learned, right? So as much as you go into a company, they say, well, I'm going to upskill you. Well, that's great. Thank you for making that investment in me. But that's something I've now learned and I've earned. I can take this with me anywhere I go. And it's through the cyclical life cycle of where people go in between organizations and typically stay within the same realm of a business, that it's okay, you upskilled me today, I'm going to upskill you tomorrow. By the time we wrap around, it's a bit of a wash ultimately, because we keep pushing our upskilled workforce through all the different organizations. So what Credivera wanted to do is we wanted to create an environment where an employee, an employer, and an issuer of a credential, and a credential can mean many things. It can be your association designation, like your PEng or your CPA or CA. It could be your training certifications, so things that you get trained on, whether it's your WMIS training or whether it's your cybersecurity training. It can be your insurance designation. You can say, yeah, I have limited liability for up to 5 million. It can be your driver's license. It can be anything that you've earned and you know and you have, that you should be able to verify directly from that source to then be able to present back to the employer or to another third party to say, here is proof of me and my information being verified from this issuer that's presented this information to me, and now I'm presenting it to you in a way in which it's cryptographically secured, it's trusted because it's verified at source, and it's something that you can rely on. And if the source was ever to choose to suspend that good standing of that certification, or it's going to naturally expire, then you as my employer or the third party I've shared this data with should also know that immediately. So why is this really important? If I go to Suncor and I say, hey Suncor, I want to work for you. I'm a welder. Suncor is going to say, well, present me some of your critical credentials. Show me that you have your Red Seal certifications, that you have your welder training, that you're staying up to date with all of your information. Well, if I can take this information now and I can say, well, I've earned my Red Seal certification from NATE or Bow Valley College, or I've earned this one from another group and so on, I can now ping these groups and say, can you please provide this proof in my digital wallet? Now Suncor can say, I trust this digital wallet because I can see where this information came from, and now I'm allowing you to come to work, and I can place you into a job faster with a higher level of assurance and trust that you're not going to go in and become a hazard to my environment. And now I can ensure that the information that's being managed is ultimately not living on my Suncor systems. Because what do I not want as an organization or a corporation anymore? I don't want personal information that a person owns about them, such as your home address, such as your checking account information, such as your personal data that you really have to keep and maintain, but I as a company don't really care to have that in my systems. So, because if I as Suncor have a data breach, somebody comes in and hacks me, now I have access to a lot of information. Like what happens if Suncor gets hacked on their, let's say their Sun Life system? I don't know if you guys use Sun Life, but assuming you use Sun Life. And now how much information are you going to be able to get about the Suncor employees from their benefits, from their checking account information, because that's where they deposit your checks after you went in, you paid for your own medicine or you paid for your own consultation, right? They reimburse you back into your checking account. They get to know all my personal information, such as my next of kin, my kids, my home address. They're like, this is literally like that bad joke, right? It was like, well, might as well just give me your password to your checking account, because it's going to be one of those, right? It's like, what's your mother's maiden name and your last dog's name? Like, you might as well just do that, because at this point in time, I'm collecting so much data about you that I can really create a profile about you. So imagine now organizations are starting to look at a different way of moving away from the world of owning people's personal data to just leasing that person's personal data, right? So it's about, let me empower you with your own digital wallet where you can manage and control all of your data. I'm going to lease it from you, meaning I'm going to ask you to send me this information or give me access to the information for the period of time that we contract or work together. But once we're done, you should just be able to cut off my access and allow me to walk away with my data. And you as an organization don't have to hold a physical record. You can hold proof that during the moment of employment or contracting together, I presented to you all the things that you needed to in order for you to be in good standing from an auditing perspective. So, as an organization, we wanted to have the win-win-win scenario. The win for the employers, or the buyers of our services typically, the win for the individuals, ownership of personal information and data, and the win for the issuers. Because what happens today is, if Tim, I'm going to just keep picking on you. I'm going to say the CA, designation body in Alberta. If Tim chooses to no longer do his professional development credits and doesn't want to pay his dues this year, well, they technically suspend him. When they say, okay, well, you're obviously not here, you don't want to be a part of this, something's changed in your life, we're going to suspend you. Well, if Tim still works for Suncor as, director of finance, I don't know, I'm just going to keep making things up about Tim today, director of finance, and he's going to run payroll, but part of his employment record is that he has to maintain in good standing a CA designation. And Tim's a bad actor today, and he's like, meh, you know what, you don't need to know. Because we just finished the audit in February, nobody's going to audit me again for another 12 months, so I'm just going to hang out at Suncor for the next 12 months, and I'll see if I want to pick up my designation again next year. Nobody's going to be able to notify the Suncor, Tim's employer, that his CA designation is expired. Because me as the association, I don't know where Tim works. I just know Tim has a CA designation with us. But now imagine if Tim has verified this information from the CA association in this digital transaction. If the CA association was to say suspend, and it's a single source of truth, what happens if now Tim's wallet gets updated and says no longer in good standing, and now the employer's information profile gets updated and says no longer in good standing? And what happens if now Tim actually shared this information on LinkedIn or on other public social media environments where he claimed to be that CA designate? What if all of them get instantly updated because of the single source of truth that say, no, Tim is no longer a good standing member, and therefore you as a third party should take action of what that means? How much more powerful is that if you're now talking about an insurance organization, right? Where you're supposed to maintain a certain level of insurance in order for you to perform your job, and now the insurer says, well, actually, you're not paying your dues, or you just canceled your policy. What if that employer that you shared that information with can now actually know in real time that policy has been canceled? You might not think it happens a lot. Well, it happens a ton. We have a lot of folks especially in the trades industries, where I'll go win a job and they'll tell me I have to have minimum $5 million liability, but that's a $45,000 a year fee that I got to pay to the insurance company. I don't want to pay those premiums. I'm just going to win the contract, show you my proof of insurance, and next month I'm just going to cancel it. And now I'm actually working uninsured for the rest of the year with this organization. So this exchange of proof is really interesting because you want to be able to find a way in which everybody gets to have that win. I, as the issuer, get to maintain the integrity of my programs by managing the issuing process and who actually should say what about themselves. I, as the individual, get to own my data, and I get to choose who I want to share my data with and for how long. And then I, as the recipient of that information, or the requester of that information, can now be able to be insured and trusting that the data that I see is always in good standing at the point in time that I click on it and I see it. So in this way, we can actually create a true win-win-win scenario for everybody. So the reason why verifiable credentials is important in this entire ecosystem of data exchange is because we all speak the same language. We all speak a common language, right? We talked about the website commonality and website language commonality. We all speak the same language. The way that I exchange with you information, the way you exchange information with me, it's the exact same way. So I can confuse, like in traditional databases where you say, my structure is FN, and your structure is first, last name. And my structure is last name, first name. And my structure is something else. Like that no longer exists, right? It's now one structured way in which the information is presented, recorded, called, and exchanged with each other. And those methods are called DID methods. Those methods of data exchange and data creation. And the reason why these methods are important is because every single organization in the world, and I'm talking about whether you're an issuer, whether you're a SaaS model business, whether you're Suncor, doesn't matter who you are in the world, every single business in the world will have to adapt to this DID standard. That is not an option, that is just the way of how things are going to go. So, what this means is that you might be one of the first ones here to hear it, but it means that every single technology you work with will have to find a way in which they can manage to exchange at least on one DID method, which today is known as DID web. Others will create their own DID methods because you want to be able to take this information and you can exchange it between different wallets, because there will also not be a single wallet to win them all, right? So it's not going to be Credivera wallet to win them all, though. Dream big, right? Go for it. But you have Apple, you have Google, right? You have Microsoft, you have many big wallet providers in the world, right? I mean, every one of you that has an Apple phone or a Samsung phone, right? You can pick it up and you can see your credit card in your wallet. You can see your, what do you call it? Flight pass, right? You can see all these things in your wallet in a way in which it's simple for you to touch it and activate and act with it. But if you were to move from your Google phone to your Apple phone, those two are not really compatible to you. You can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to tap these two and one card's going to fly to the other one. They don't speak the same language. Well, in the world that we're moving into, they will all have to speak at least one of the same languages, which is DID web. And then they can create also their own unique languages that allows them to transact between different Apple wallets, different Google wallets, right, within their own ecosystem, because they also have a massive ecosystem. But at the same time, it will allow users to exchange data between different wallets as they go through their life. So if I work for Suncor today, but I go work for Synovus tomorrow, or I might change completely professions and I'm going to be a politician the next day. I can take this information with me and I can exchange it based on the wallet need that I have for the group that I'm going to go work and perform a business transaction for. Because in our lives, we have three different methods of identity. We have foundational identity, right, which is your SIN number, your driver's license, your health card number, right? Those are foundational identities. You have workforce identities, right? Are the identities that allow you to be the performer that you are in your job, whether that's your designations or whether those are continuous learning or upskilling that you get. And then you also have your personal life certifications and designations, right? Your coach of your boys soccer team. You have to go in and have your own separate certifications, which are part of your life certifications. But all of these three can live in different wallets but they can also interact with each other. And you can also collapse them and bring them all into one wallet. And that's why when we say there's not going to be a single wallet to win them all, the point is that this information is managed, controlled by you, and you can choose where you want to present it, who do you want to present it to, and for how long. So, this is where the world is moving, and this is how the world is ultimately going to be exchanging data. Data now has more value than we've imagined before because now it's our data. And we can state who and for how long somebody has that data for. So, when we said that we are the first open exchange of verifiable credentials, we've managed to amount to just over 10,000 issuers in our environment that we can verify information from and at source. This means that the source providers are also groups that can now manage this information and choose whether the people they issue this data to should still have that data and at what status it should be. And the reason why this is important is because when you look at what we just talked about a few minutes ago, which is the leveraging of Web3 technology, right? We no longer call it blockchain, we call it Web3 because blockchain was scary and people didn't get it. We called it smart contract. Lawyers got annoyed, so now we don't call them that anymore either, right? So the evolution of the technology is really just a technology, right? Do you care today when you go on your mobile device and you download an app, and do you care if it's on Java or C++? Or you don't care. You care that you downloaded something that does what you asked it to do for the purpose of why you downloaded that app. But that's the same thing with Web3 technology. So many of the apps that you guys are currently working on today or have are probably actually running a Web3 engine behind the scenes. But they don't need to explain that to you or say that to you publicly because maybe they're going to get people to be scared and be like, oh, I don't want to touch this. It's Web3. Web3 is blockchain. Blockchain is crypto. And it's like, that is not true. And it's partially true, but it's not entirely true. So, because you want to leverage Web3 technology, and you want to have an evolution of Web3 technology, this is where verifiable credentials really becomes a key component of the evolution of Web3 technology. In a traditional blockchain environment, Tim had to host a node, you had to host a node, I had to host a node, you had to host a node, and that's how we were able to exchange trust between all of us. And I can trust you because I know Tim, and Tim's part of my permissioned circle. Well, imagine if you now have a technology where this verifiable credentials no longer needs you to have a node. It's no longer a thing. What we did, though, is we created something public, which is called the universal resolver, which means that I can take any one of these transactions, these cryptographically secure transactions, and I can post it in a universal resolver, which is a website. You can go to the Digital Identity Foundation, DIF, Digital Identity Foundation, and if it's running a DID-Web method, you can just publish that transaction and say, who is this issuer, and is this an approved global issuer? I no longer need a node segment to tell me that this is truthful or not truthful. So this is an evolution of blockchain to an independent model where you can now own this information. And I, as an organization, no longer need to create this entire distributed network model. It is created for me. It still cryptographically secures the same way that you'd see it on a blockchain. It still creates the append methodology of the information. So therefore, we're able to bring all this information in light of truth, and we can bring it in such a way in which all of us can trust it. Because we know that it couldn't have come to me verified if it wasn't verified by the source. And I know that the source couldn't have verified me if the source is not a published, trusted source. So this ecosystem of trust that's been built is a new model for how we're going to move forward with the world of digital identity and trust. And when I say identity, please don't think identity of just people, personal identity, but think of your banking identity. Think of your asset identity. Like your car is got its own asset identity, right? So, why we went the path that we went is because we wanted to create a way in which, as I mentioned, people own their own data. Employers don't need to worry about owning people's data. And then issuers can be a part of this entire process. So through this ecosystem, when you look at the global human workforce that exists today, this is an incredibly powerful statement, that by 2030, we are actually going to have a shortage of 85 million workers to fulfill the jobs that we're looking at today. Well, it might sound kind of crazy, but how do I know that out of those people that are actually applying for this job, they are actually the most qualified people for this job? How can you prove to me that you're the one that should stand out in the crowd than anybody else? Well, if I can provide you my proof with my verifiable identity and my verifiable credentials and my information behind it, am I the one that's going to stand out? If I'm the recruiter, that's the person I'm taking first and I'm presenting to the potential hiring manager. Right? Because this person's now been able to prove to me that they actually have all the qualifications, competencies, and training, and also that they are who they say they are. We have distributed organizations today. Right? You might be a hiring manager in British Columbia, and you're hiring for the folks in North Dakota, or you're Newfoundland. You don't know who the person is that's showing up on that job. You saw them in the interview process, because they came on Zoom, but Bradley, the floor manager, didn't know. And it's not Yogi that's showing up, it's Robert. Robert's showing up and saying, hey, I'm Yogi. Right? I'm here to do the job today. But you don't know who that is. Right? So now the exchange of this data and information is going to now allow everybody to work in a world of trust, where we know that it's only this person that could have actually showed up to that job because they're the ones that were actually qualified to do that job that we hired for. So our head of identity is a really, really fun character. And most of you will not recognize the name Michael Burchill, but in Alberta, he is a bit of a legend. And the reason why is because, actually, he's big of a legend in many places. But in Alberta, he's the one that built MADI, My Alberta Digital ID. Right? So if you think about the way that you go online today and you have to look at your health records, or you want to print out other information about yourself, you go into the MADI system. And what makes MADI really powerful as a system is that it's the first level 3 secure system in North America. North America. Hey, Alberta. Talk about putting yourself on the map with that one. And Michael's the one that built it. We're lucky to have Michael join Credivera as our head of digital identity. But why this is important for us is because we don't just talk about the world of identity, we actually practice it. And we actually make sure that we have the top talent that's building the technology in such a way in which we don't look behind and say, we cut corners, we shouldn't have done this, we shouldn't have done that. So I love Michael's quote because it really speaks to where we are today, right? Technology created a problem and we created a solution. He speaks as Credivera. Technology made it really easy for us to send documents and exchange information, emails, text exchanges, right? But once it made it that easy, it made it hard to verify who was sending that information. I was laughing. I just sent some, just before we started this meeting, I just sent a note to our head of cybersecurity, Trujano, and I said, hey, look, somebody's sending me a note to tell me that my Credivera password for my app is expired, and it tells me to go open my authenticator to re-authenticate myself for that, and it comes from like @randomemailaddress.com. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like an email I would have sent to myself as Credivera, but thanks for picking the wrong person here in this process. But that's exactly the point, right? You don't know who is requesting you or sending you this information. And with the amount of data that we're exchanging, we're constantly in this environment of how much of this data is true? Who is it coming from? Do I trust the source? Is it somebody that is phishing me, is spamming me? I don't know all that stuff. So we can have all the blockers in the world that we want. And I know Snowflake, you guys do a great job at creating that kind of architecture and hollow around it. But the reality is, nobody can really stop it completely. We can try to block as much of it as possible, but we can't really stop it. So, before Credivera, when we look at the world of identity and credential management, if I take, for example, a field operations worker, that's what they used to show up with. And this is, by the way, this is name redacted, but it's a really dear friend of ours. Maggie and I have known him for many, many years. And his son, this was his summer job. He was field operations working, being a good kid, making lots of money in the field. Well, these are the credentials they hear in that summer alone. Now imagine what a guy 20 years in the field looks like, right? Now imagine this kid worked for the summer. What happens if you have to work for 3 years, which is typically your time lapse for your next credential renewal? How many of these are you going to take? I remember when I was in our last tech company, and we used to implement our software, and I would have to go to, I don't know, Fort McMurray or Nexon Operation or others, and I would literally go on site, and I would just open up a binder, and instead of having the binder with business cards, I had the binder with these cards. And I'll be like, and flip the page, and what do you need to see today? Oh, you need to see my WMIS? Okay, well, here's my WMIS for you. Oh, you need to see my site orientation for the Suncor site versus the Nexon site versus the Sonova site. Well, guess what? When I said that we had 35% market share in Canada, you can just imagine how many companies those were between British Columbia to Sarnia that we were going in and implementing our platform and technology to. Like I could walk into Scotford, or I could walk into one of the Edmonton refinery blocks. There's like 9 companies in that same block. So I'm now walking between Pembina, Shell, and Suncor, and use CNRL, and I gotta now open up the binder and show to everybody who I am and what I do. And each one of them is a little bit different, because it's like, yeah, 4 of these plus 2 of these. Right, so I feel like it's a happy meal at this point. So the point of this was that if you now took this and you laid it out like this, what would that do to the ingenuity of how I can exchange information with you? What if before I even showed up to your site, I would tell you, hey, by the way, here's the data that you asked me for. It's all here. And guess what? All of these are actually verified directly at source. So now when I walk through the gate, imagine how much different this is if I now take this and I put it on and I activate my card lock system with this. Right? Many of you know if you go to hotels nowadays, you can go online and you can say, yeah, I'm just going to do my web check-in and then I'm going to put it on my mobile device and I can have a digital key. Right? And I can tap my phone and view my digital key as I walk into my hotel. I never even need to see the front desk again. Sometimes a good or a bad thing, depends. But predominantly it's like, hey, I can skip that entire process. So now imagine if I can just walk on site with all this information and I can tap my way right through that gate lock system. Tamper-proof data, verified at source. You know my identity, you know who I am. You know when I've showed up on site. And you know that I've actually met all of your site requirements. What if there's a door that I'm not allowed to unlock? There's a floor I'm not allowed to go into. There's a server room I'm not allowed to touch because I don't have the qualifications, competencies, and training to do that. Imagine how much more powerful it is for you and your IT team and the technology team to then say, you know what? We can give you selective access, granted only for this block in this time frame. And if you don't make it there, then c'est la vie. But what if that token just nicely expires at the end of that transaction? You never have to worry about the person returning a card back to you or signing out. It's like, well, we know they can't come back tomorrow because they can't get them anywhere. So we really love this tagline, which is people deserve credit for earned knowledge and credentials. And the reason why we love it is because, as I mentioned earlier, everything you learn, everything you're being upskilled with is something that you can take away with you in life. And it ultimately becomes a bit of a wash in the industry. Yeah, it's expensive for an organization to train you and then you leave. Typically in your junior years, it's a little bit harder for a company because they've invested a lot of time in you. Once you start hitting certain seniority years, it's a bit of a wash around the industry as how you end up moving around. But if we look at our technology, you're going to see a number of names on here that are quite unique, right? So you have in here AREA, which is the Alberta Realtor Association. What do they have to do with verifiable credentials? Well, imagine how powerful it is if I now, as a consumer, right, I'm going out and I'm looking to sell my house or buy a house. How do I know that you're actually a realtor today? You can tell me you're a realtor today. You can make a card and come and be like, I'd like to represent you. You and I transact. We go through. We see a bunch of houses. I love the house. And then just as I'm about to go do my closing, you say, you know what? Actually, my friend over here, he's going to just complete the transaction for you. Thank you very much for your service. And you kind of just buzz out of the picture. And he's the only one that's certified. Who did I work with? How did I interact with you? What promises did you make me that you haven't told him that I'm not going to deal with in the last minute? So from a public safety perspective, I don't know how many of you have seen what's happened in Ontario right? With people having their houses sold from underneath them, right? You go away on a 2-week vacation, they've been scoping you, and now you go away for 2 weeks, and they've literally taken out your lease, they've taken out your land titles, they've taken out everything, and they've mortgage brokered the entire transaction with fake lawyers, and you no longer own your home, and you come home and it's like somebody's living in your house. And they're like, hey, I'm just moved in. And you're like, moved in where? I've never moved out. Like, how is this a thing? Right? So imagine how powerful that is. So when you look at the Alberta Realtors Association, they're now launching the Credivera technology to be able, for a public safety perspective, allow you to scan somebody's code, or allow that realtor to share with you a code to be able to prove to you that they are right now, when you click on this document, or you click on this link, they can prove to you that you are realtor certified, so you're RECA certified, your membership's in good standing, and you actually are the person that you say that you are, right? That's the identity component. You've got groups like Agilus. Agilus is, what is the 6th largest placement agency in Canada. They're using the Credivera solution to be able to prove to their employers, to the hiring managers, that the individuals that they're about to see are qualified, certified, and competent to do the job they're being placed for. And now they can prove that the individual's information is verified at source. But more importantly, Agilus only exchanges the data with you for a select period of time. So if you're the hiring manager and I'm sending you 10 resumes, and you say I only like these 2, I can actually take away the other 8. Those other 8 never made it into your inbox. At the end of the job posting, when you close out the job posting, you don't have to go scrape it. And you never had to hold somebody's personal information. What's on a resume? First name, last name, home address, phone number, right? Previous work history. It's a lot of PII. Right? It's a lot of data that, why do I want to own that? As the hiring manager, I don't need to know this stuff. I just need to know that you're the only candidate I want, not everybody else. So I should be able to forget this information. It should never even come into my systems. Many more to go through. But anyway, point being, whether you're an association, whether you're a background screening organization, whether you're a placement agency, whether you're a construction company, whether you're Microsoft, it doesn't matter. The use of this technology is completely revolutionary. Everything that Microsoft is doing, and we are, by the way, a preferred identity access management solution for Microsoft. To get that kind of a partner status, we went through a lot. But the bottom line behind it is, Microsoft is investing over $20 billion over the next 3 years to ensure that this information, the way that it's managed and controlled, is your new way to your cybersecurity, and it's your new way for access control management. We talked about being able to take your data and share it on LinkedIn. This is a perfect example of Alana, who's sitting outside the door, who's actually taken her information and shared it directly on. She grabbed her WIMIS from Danatech. Danatech verified that the WIMIS is actually real. She posted that information on LinkedIn. If she expires on her Danatech WIMIS credential, it will automatically expire and you were shared it. So, self-sovereign identity, SSI. That's the key component that we talked about when it comes down to you managing, owning your own personal information. So you're the holder. You can store these verifiable credentials. Behind the scenes, what we've also been working on over the last 2 years, and this is the fun part of being a small tech startup that's really fast evolving. We've been working with Microsoft. How many of you have Microsoft Authenticator on your phones? Okay, if you look at your Microsoft Authenticator at the bottom, you're going to see a new tag called Verified ID. That Verified ID is the module that we worked with Microsoft on launching. And the reason why this is important is because I can now pass my information using one of the Microsoft methods or one of the other globally respected methods, which is called DID-ION. I can now pass that information directly into my Microsoft Authenticator, and I can now use that Authenticator information and I can provision my Active Directory. So imagine how powerful this is when I can now say that Active Directory is no longer just first name, last name, and my AD number and my email address, but it's also am I a CA today? What that CA designation that's in AD, that's against your HR profile, that says this is what you need to have in order to perform your job today, Tim, if that expires from source or gets revoked from source, it will instantly notify your AD, and your AD will now be able to tell you whether you should allow to have certain system access. Tim shouldn't be able to run payroll tomorrow, right? Because he's breach of contract with his own organization. So we talked about managing mission critical applications. We talked about interoperability with Microsoft Authenticator. We talked about VCs, verifiable credentials used, and again, welcome to techies, right? We gotta love this. VCs used to be venture capital, and now we've just thrown a new term in it. So let's make the new smart contract happen. So VCs are now used for logical and physical access. It's part of the new Web3 standards. And it's deployable using today's IT capabilities. This is very, very important to understand. This is not something that the IT teams won't understand. When we sell into an organization today, and we get the CIO's office coming into what we're doing, they're like, oh my God, you guys exist? We love you. This is phenomenal. The way that we can now control our cybersecurity and some of the key aspects and management of this work is what we've all been dreaming about. So it's no longer a function where I walk into head of operations or HR and I say, hey, you should introduce me to your IT team as we're talking about this, you buying our solution. And before it used to be introduce me as early on as you could, or it used to be don't talk to them until we really need them at the end. Now we're like, no, these are going to be friendlies. They're going to love what they're going to hear, and they're going to be a big proponent of what we're going to want to move and do with this. And all of this really lives around this concept of verify and monitor, right? So verify once, monitor continuously, right? That's the purpose of liveness. That's the purpose of having the information managed and sourced directly from that issuer. So why this is important is because when you look at ensuring compliance, protective of sensitive information, robust compliance and auditing, where we talked about levels of assurance that exist. See how all these things are nicely tying back together from where we started to where we are? This is why. It's because it's completely changing the way that we do business, but yet it's available today and it's implementable today. I talked about our solution. I kind of gave you the highlights as to where we are, what we do, how we focus, right? So we talked about verifiable credentials, we talked about the compliance requirements, we talked about the fact that there's a network, and there's sharing and resolving of this information. And then ultimately it's about the high value training. So this is that your continuous upskilling and learning and building your own persona, whether it's foundational identity, plus your work identity, plus your personal identity, all of these kind of come into one single group. I give you an example of how this would actually work. Right? I said if I sell to an employer, the employer can present you a request to say, hey, for your worker profile, here's the minimum requirements I need of you. That gets provisioned to you as an individual, as a potential worker, to say, hey, here's a digital wallet that I need you to provide all these proofs into. So it already comes with your 6 things that you need to provide, or 10 or 15, whatever the requirements are for the employer. And the moment you provision them, and this is where I now own my data, I now say, yes, you have the right to verify this information. Pings the source, is this true, right? So let's say a background check. How do I know that you actually did complete your criminal background check? How do I know that you've done your Equifax check? Verifies the source, provides the proof back. Now everybody has that visibility into the proof. I can now take this information, I can post it on LinkedIn, I can share it to my Microsoft Authenticator, I can share it with my get access controls. So I can start working with this data and I can leverage it to be to my advantage for the things that I need to be able to do. The last part that I didn't tell you guys about, which is, it's great to be a Microsoft partner for the work that we do, but behind the scenes, Credivera has been leading the way and leading the path towards digital identity for all Canadians and Canadian businesses. So over the last 2 years, we've been working with the government of Canada to actually create and develop the rails of issuance of your personal identity. So, I know, it's kind of cool. You guys, when you're going to get your first digital identity provisioned to you, it will be through the Credivera rails. So, this is not a when is it going to happen, or it's maybe going to happen. No, this is happening. This is part of your new digital identity future, and this is something that's going to be in your hands within, when I say a very short period of time, I'm talking about within the next 3 to 5 years. This will be a proliferant technology that you will have to use in order to conduct your day-to-day business. So businesses will have to adopt and adapt to be able to allow you to interact with them. So out of 150 plus participants, Credivera and 6 others got accepted into phase 1. Interact Canada being one of them, so 2 keys and secure key. For those of you that ever do your taxes, you have to log in using your secure key. Actually, most importantly, any one of you that go to Costco and you want to go and access your data on your Costco card, you have to log in with your secure key information in order to get to your Interact bank account. Well, imagine Interact coming head to head with Credivera, and Credivera going for the win. So phase 2 of the Government of Canada project gets awarded to Credivera, where Interact becomes a subcontractor to Credivera in helping building the digital identity of all Canadians and Canadian businesses. So we're building something pretty freaking awesome here behind the scenes. And we're happy to share this with you because we don't really share this information publicly very often. So, this is part of where Maggie, our Chief Growth Officer and head of the identity for the workforce solutions, come into play, where she kind of created this message. She created the value proposition of where we are. So turn individual talent into a powerful community of shared interest. So imagine if I can now go into a verifiable LinkedIn, and I know exactly who I'm picking because I've set my criterias, and it's only these 40 people that actually fit all my criterias. And this information is verifiable, it's verified at source, it's truthful right now, and I can rely on it, and I can make an action against that individual. How powerful is that?